The legend of Bigfoot has captured the imaginations of people for centuries, with numerous stories and sightings of big, hairy creatures lurking in the woods. Yet there is one incident that dates back to 1924 that, in my opinion, is the granddaddy of all Bigfoot encounters. Ape Canyon is located in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, a remote area that spans parts of southern Washington state. The area is thick with old-growth forests, deep ravines, and steep cliffs, a place where the sounds of nature can easily mask any strange noises, and where one could easily get lost in the vast expanse of wilderness. It was here in the summer of 1924 that 5 miners, Fred Beck, his brother, and 3 other men, made their way into the canyon to prospect for gold. The miners were no strangers to the harsh conditions of the mountains, but the expedition would soon lead them into an experience that would change their lives and views of the creatures lurking in the forest. They set up camp near the edge of Ape Canyon. Oh yeah, there was supposed to be gold in those hills, and this group was ready to go all out on their mission. But they didn't bargain on what would happen next. They had already been in camp for 7 days and had all that they needed, provisions and a small sturdy cabin that they'd built themselves for shelter. The men had been busy every day at their mine, which went as far as 75 feet deep into the side of the canyon. But things had been quite strange. Every evening, the craziest of noises had been drifting out of the darkening twilight. Shrills, whistles. They could tell that some of the noises were emanating from one ridge, and then they would hear what seemed to be quite eerily an answering whistle over from another ridge. And on top of that, there was also an occasional booming, thumping sound, almost as if something was hitting itself on its chest. According to Fred Beck, the man who would later be the most vocal about the events that transpired, the trouble really began on a warm summer day. Fred, with another miner, went to collect some water from a nearby spring, about 100 yards down from the cabin. They had their rifles with them, walked casually along and chatted away. And then, suddenly, they looked over to the other side of a small canyon. Standing in front of them was a large, hairy, bipedal creature just staring at them. They raised their rifles. The creature darted towards a tree line and disappeared behind the tree. It poked its head out from the side. Fred was taken aback. He didn't expect his friend to take a shot. The creature quickly disappeared from view. The men just looked at each other. What was that? They quickly made their way back to the cabin to tell the rest of the party. This was unbelievable. The men agreed to head home, but it would have to wait until the morning. It was soon dark. Nightfall found the men in their pine log cabin. They smoked pipes and discussed what to do with the gold mine. And also, of course, they were questioning what was that hairy creature they'd seen. Having no windows in the cabin, they felt safe from the wild countryside outside. After a while, lamps were turned off. The men suddenly woke. Something was smashing into the side of the cabin wall. It was chaos. Jumping to their feet, the men grabbed their guns. Squinting through a gap in the wall, they could make out 3 large figures. But it sounded like there were many more. They could hear heavy footsteps all around the cabin. Rocks were being thrown from all directions. This was mad. It was chaos. And then something was on the roof. Rifles loaded, the men emptied round after round towards the ceiling. The Hugh-locked door was taking a real bashing. The men braced it with a long pole taken from one of the bunk beds. The creatures were attempting to smash the door in, and the whole cabin vibrated. They responded by firing shots through a gap that had appeared near the door. And then, quiet again. The time went on, and suddenly, through a space that had opened up near the door due to the constant impacts from outside, a muscular, hairy arm reached through. The men couldn't believe what they were seeing. An axe lay right next to the door, and whatever it was trying to grab it. Shots were quickly fired, and the arm disappeared quickly, accompanied by an angry growl outside. The night had been exhausting, traumatic, and totally frenetic. But as daylight arrived, the attack just suddenly stopped. Giving it a little time, the group cautiously opened the door to take a look around. Rifles raised, they scanned the area. And then, there, on the other side of the canyon, one of the ape-like creatures was standing, just staring at them. Fred didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and shot 3 times. The creature tumbled over, and before they knew it, it disappeared, falling down into the gorge below. They'd had enough, leaving $200 of supplies, powder, and drilling equipment behind. The miners quickly left the area. The events of that night were not easily explained, and many of the miners were indeed shaken by the experience. Fred Beck, who would later become the most vocal of the group, went on to tell his version of the events to anyone who would listen, emphasizing that he was certain the creatures they encountered were not bears or any known animals, but something far more mysterious. Of course, the Ape Canyon story has been met with its fair share of skepticism. Critics have pointed out that the miners perhaps were victims of their own imaginations, or possibly under the influence of alcohol. Others have suggested that the events could have been a case of mistaken identity. Perhaps the miners had encountered a group of bears. But then again, do bears throw rocks? I don't know. And can they actually climb up onto a roof of a cabin? Again, I'm not qualified to say yes or no, but it doesn't seem likely. In the years following the incident, there have been no definitive physical evidence or remains of the creatures the miners claim to have encountered. No clear photographs or samples of hair or footprints were ever recovered to substantiate the claims of Bigfoot's existence. Still, for many, the lack of physical evidence is still not enough to dismiss the encounter outright. The Ape Canyon incident, whether one believes it to be true or not, remains an essential part of Bigfoot lore. The story helped fuel a growing fascination with the creature and sparked additional reports of sightings and encounters throughout the Pacific Northwest. The incident also contributed to the continuing myth of Bigfoot. It also added an element of danger to the creature's image, moving away from the idea of a shy, reclusive giant to a hostile force of nature, one that could be capable of attacks, rocks thrown with deadly precision, and frightening encounters. This was the reason one particular individual, Mark Mirsel, started researching the infamous events from the early 2000s. He investigated all manner of avenues regarding Ape Canyon. And in his pursuit for the truth behind the events, his research took him to newspaper archives, libraries, local historical societies, even courthouses. And then Mirsel amazingly made contact with the descendants of the very miners who'd been involved. Betty Mitchell, daughter of one of the miners, Leroy Smith, knew of the Ape Canyon story, but had no idea her father was tied to it. According to Mirsel, Leroy Smith was quoted saying he didn't want to have anything to do with what he shot at again. Something profound had certainly scared off these guys. And when you think about it, I mean, they were very adept to the woods. They'd probably seen and heard pretty much everything that's out there. According to Mirsel, another miner present named Marion Smith said that he didn't care how much gold was in the mine following the attack. And that's kind of saying everything, really. I mean, they were prospectors for gold. To suddenly just say, no, I'm not going back there ever again. Yeah. The location of the cabin had become a mystery until one day in 2013. Mirsel and some of his friends went up to look around and found rotting stumps. They broke out a metal detector and located the foundation of the cabin as well. There were leftover nails, a bucksaw, baling wire, and with the metal detector, they were able to find within the perimeter of the cabin, so essentially in the cabin, a scattering of bullet casings. As for the gold mine, this was discovered in August 2023 by none other than Betty Mitchell's grandsons. Using directions from Mirsel, they visited the possible site of their great-grandfather's cabin, and while they were there, they continued to explore the area until they finally stumbled across the actual mine. For centuries, figures that resemble large primates have been woven into baskets and carved into rocks along the Columbia River. Many West Coast tribes tell stories of large, hairy, wild men who stood taller than 7 feet. The historic and recent physical evidence uncovered certainly points to a traumatic incident in 1924. I mean, what would force these miners to abandon a successful mine? Whether the miners encountered Bigfoot, a family of unknown primates, or simply a series of misunderstandings, the legacy continues to fuel Bigfoot research and capture the imagination of all those who dare to look deep into the woods.